1 silk handkerchief, 1 watch, 1 ring, 1 gold money clip with no money in it, and 1 mobile phone.
John, a copy too, if you have one.
Hey!
Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
So, yeah. I know I might have ruined the surprise, but I couldn't contain my excitement because Richard Stratton's here, friend of mine, and Frankie's a friend of the show, certainly since we started, always made himself available. Thank you so much, my friend, for being here. Now, Richard Stratton, you may know if you read his original book. Your original book was The Smuggler's Blues, talking about how you were way ahead of the game with the whole cannabis industry. You were in the cannabis industry before the government even knew they were supposed to make it legal.
I was in it when it was fun.
When it was fun. And Smuggler's Blues recounts all those days when Richard was a smuggler. Unfortunately, he got caught before pot became so legal, and he went to jail. And while he was incarcerated, he wrote Kingpin, right? And that was about your time in jail and different people you met in there. And now the third part is this new book, In the World, which brings you from the big house to Hollywood. And I mean, you have been on a crazy roller coaster of a ride, but I mean, you're like a Harley Davidson. You know what I'm saying? You just keep lasting. No, that's what I mean.
You gotta keep it rolling, baby.
He's the Harley Davidson of drug smugglers. I'm still obsessed with those days. You know what I'm saying? Like, what made you think it was okay to carry, millions of pounds of pot and hashish into the U.S.?
Well, millions of people were smoking it.
Yeah, all right.
There was a demand, and being a capitalist from the United States, when there's a demand, you've got to fill that demand.
So let me have, if you don't mind, let me have the copy of the book. Let me put it right here so that everybody could see it. Let's let the world see it. Frankie's got his copy over there.
That's right.
He's got his own area now, as you can see. He's got the Frank zone over there. He's got all his bulks and all that stuff.
I've seen he's got his favorite president up right behind him there.
That's right. No, he's in front. He's in front.
Okay.
There he is.
But Richard, so I've read the first 2 books of this trilogy. I've read Smuggler's Blues and Kingpin, both of which, if people haven't picked up, are page turners. I'm looking forward to reading this one this afternoon. I just got this today. But in a nutshell, we hear so many stories about people who have a difficult time acclimating back into the world after spending years in prison, let alone federal prison, let alone a decade. How did you make that transition from being a federal prisoner, a convicted felon, to being in movies like Wall Street 2? And that's just the tip of the iceberg. I know you were a showrunner for a great show on Showtime called Street Time. You produced this Gotti documentary for A&E, and a whole bunch of other credits I haven't listed. How did you make the transition?
Well, actually, what happened was that a good friend of mine was working with a documentary filmmaker named Barbara Koppel. And she was doing a documentary about Mike Tyson, who had recently been charged with and gone to trial for rape. And she needed someone who knew about boxing, who was also a writer, who could write the proposal for her documentary, which ultimately aired on NBC. So my friend suggested me, Barbara hired me, and then during that process, she hired me as a producer, kind of a line producer, out running around setting up interviews with people for the documentary. And I was running from payphone to payphone. In those days, there were no cell phones quite yet. They were coming. But so as I was doing this and setting up interviews and trying to get people from the crew there to shoot these interviews, I thought to myself, this is remarkably like what I used to do, running around on cell phones and on pay phones.
Making movies is like being a marijuana smoker.
In a way, had that same kind of rush and energy. So I thought, you know what, I could do this. This could be a profession that I could really get into. So after the Tyson documentary, I got hired to work as a producer on a documentary about Muhammad Ali that won an Academy Award.
Wow.
When We Were Kings, which was an incredible documentary. And after that, through some meetings that I recount in my book, I met a guy by the name of Mark Levin, who's a documentary filmmaker. and he introduced me to Sheila Nevins at HBO, and we went on to make a series of documentaries mostly about prison in America, based on my experience and based on my knowledge of prison life.
Wow, so you did 10 years in the can, right?
Eight years, yeah.
8 years of a 10-year sentence or something like that?
It was a 25-year sentence.
25-year sentence. What do you think about all this stuff going on with bail reform now, that people can just get released? And what do you think, as someone who's paid your price to society?
Well, look, I have to say that there are people who are locked up who need to be locked up. Violent, predatory criminals, people who steal, rob, who prey on society, they need to be locked up. And you can't, if you're going to do a bail reform act, you want to let people out who are in there for nonviolent, low-level crimes, that's one thing. But you don't let rapists, murderers, and people charged with serious violent crimes should not be let out.
So right here in New York, we had a guy, he robbed 4 banks, right? Now they catch him, they snag him, right? They lock him up. Within 12 hours, he's back on the street. He goes and robs a 5th bank.
What do you expect him to do?
What are you going to do?
That's what he does. You know, this is the thing that kills me about the criminal justice system. Every once in a while, they try to reform it, but the people who try to reform it don't know what they're doing. Clearly, they don't know what they're doing. So they blunder into a new regime, and then the new regime turns out to be worse than the last regime.
I take it you're a big boxing guy. You were talking about Ali and all this other stuff. We had Zab Judah on the show yesterday, 6-time world champion, and there was some interesting, I think Trump has probably done more than any president for reform, right? The first step back for nonviolent crimes. I think he's done something great there, and it disproportionately affects the minority communities. But he's still not resonating with the African American communities, Trump, as a president. But Zab Judah, who's not a supporter of the president, said to me yesterday, you know what? No matter how you slice it, we all got more money in our pocket. So he must be doing something right. You think certainly on prison reform, but on other places, you think the president's doing something good? Anything good?
Well, look, we hope so. Let's face it, we hope so. We don't know how much of that is, these trends or these times in the economic world, who knows how much of that has to do with the administration that's there at the moment and things that were put in place before he came in. So we don't really know. We'll have to see how this thing with the tariffs shake out. I mean, look, Trump is an interesting guy, and the people who are organizing and running his regime, they're interesting people. You have to keep your eye on them because they've got a lot of tricks up their sleeves. They will wag the dog, so to speak, and go out and create troubles around the world so that they can justify themselves being reelected. So, I don't trust them at all. I don't trust the Democrats, but I don't trust the Republicans even more.
Richard, there's one agency that has, in spite of whoever the president is, seems to have just nothing but trouble. That's the Bureau of Prisons. We were talking a little earlier about Jeffrey Epstein. You actually knew Whitey Bulger, and you wrote about your interactions with him as a criminal in your first book in this trilogy, Smuggler's Blues. This is the first book out since Whitey Bulger was murdered inside a federal prison just yesterday. They got a new warden in that very prison. I'm curious, what's your take on the whole Whitey Bulger situation? Do you think this was something that was just unavoidable because of who he was and being locked up with these criminals, or does the BOP bear some culpability here?
Well, I actually write about the Epstein killing, Epstein murder. I have to say that it was, in my expert
So you don't
opinion,
think he killed himself?
No. Listen, I spent a lot of time on that unit, 9 South, maximum security and MCC, and it's interesting because they go, oh, well, we're understaffed, we can't. That is total nonsense. The Bureau of Prisons is a finely run machine. They have the most dangerous people in the world, the richest criminals in the world, drug lords, mafia bosses, terrorists in their custody. And therefore, they know exactly what they're doing. And they know everything that goes on in those different institutions from time to time.
Finally, Richard, you close this book talking about fathers and sons. Not only your relationship with your own father, but a surrogate father of types, famed writer Norman Mailer, and a great documentary film that you produced that I'm privileged to be in, Gotti, Godfather and Sons. What is it about the father and son relationship that so fascinates you in your writing and in your producing?
Well, I'm a father and I'm a son, so therefore I'm interested in that relationship, and I also believe that young men coming up in America don't have enough interaction with their fathers for a lot of different reasons. Men are too busy out there trying to make a living, and therefore these kids, these young men that come up, are not prepared for manhood in a lot of cases. And I also think the Me Too movement and a lot of other things have pointed out the fact that most American men are ill-bred. You know, that we really need more activity between fathers and sons, and fathers need to teach their sons how to behave in society, how to treat women, how to live in this world without abusing other people. Wow. So that's what fascinates me about this relationship. I will say also that I had very slight relationship with my father, and I believe that one of the reasons I got in so much trouble as a kid was because my father paid no attention to me when I was growing up. I don't recall ever sitting on his lap. I don't recall ever hugging him. Excuse me.
All right, well,
People
while you take that
asking me
call,
calls.
it's okay.
It's his son. He has to
yeah,
answer.
it's your son. No, you know
it's
what?
not, but it's somebody else's son.
I love that, the things you're talking about. I had, you know, my father, we mentioned in the last segment with Greg Kelly, who premieres tonight on Newsmax at 7 p.m. with Greg Kelly Reports. His dad was NYPD. My dad was NYPD. Plus, he always worked a second job, a third job, driving a limo, doing security, so there wasn't a lot of sitting on the lap and hugging and kissing, but he was a baseball coach, a football coach, and the places where we needed him, that was the whole establishment of my relationship. And that's when I learned all the things you're talking about, how to treat people, how to be a gentleman, how to look people in the eye when you shake their hand, say hello to them. And I think maybe a little bit more of that, you know, in this generation might go a long way.
Well, you know, and I make the point in this book at the end when I talk about fathers and sons. Fathers who are out there, I mean, obviously things have changed. The women are much more in the workplace now than they used to be when I grew up. But us men know that when you go out there into that world and you meet other men, those guys are not necessarily your friends. Oh, yeah. They may be your friends, but they also may be in competition with you for women, for money, for jobs, for what have you. So it's really kind of a dog-eat-dog world, you know, out there. So that, I think, boys need to be prepared for that. They need to understand that when you get out there, you know, look, and what brought it to my mind was John Gotti Jr., thrown into this world where it's a real dog-eat-dog world.
Wow.
And had no real relationship with his father, but idolized his father.
No doubt about it. Well, listen, there's so much to learn from Richard Stratton. Richard Stratton is a tremendous author, tremendous on-screen, off-screen, and always tremendous for us. Thank you, my friend.
Hey, my
really
pleasure.
Appreciate you coming down.
Always a treat to be here and see you, especially to see my buddy Frank.
Yeah, Frankie, boys, he's the best.
I will say I was kind of sorry that I missed the wedding, but then when I read about the reception, I wasn't so sorry.
Well, that's Richard Stratton. Go out and get his newest book, In the World. And if you're not up to speed on Richard Stratton, you better get up to speed. Go out and get book number 1, Smuggler's Blues, Kingpin, and now the third piece of the trilogy. And then maybe more, because he's still got a lot of stories to write, according to him. We're going to write a few more stories right here to finish up hour 2, but don't go anywhere. My brother's out on the streets right now, and then we're going to come back and wrap it all up with a bow for you in the WTF right after this.